Lyra stood alone in the frozen wasteland, her body trembling against the cold that seemed to pierce through her very bones. Her once vibrant clothes, now reduced to ashes, had long been burned to keep her warm. The firewood she had scavenged was gone, and the night air was growing colder. She shivered violently, but the freezing wind would not let her rest. It had been 4 days since the crash, and she had not seen another soul. The alien ship she had traveled in had fallen from the sky, destroyed in a strange accident. Lyra had barely survived the crash, stumbling from the wreckage, her limbs weak and her mind in a haze. She had hoped to find help, to find some trace of civilization, but nothing. Only endless white snow and bitter winds. The cold was not something she was used to. Her people lived in warmer climates, in places where the sun never fully set. But this world was different, and she had no choice but to adapt. With nothing left but her own will to survive, Lyra continued her struggle. Each night she searched for whatever scraps of wood or material she could find, burning them to keep the fire going. She could feel her strength slipping away, but still she fought to stay alive. Her clothes had been her first source of warmth. She had carefully peeled off pieces of her torn uniform, using the fabric to fuel the fire. But now there was nothing left. Her skin had turned pale and bruised, her face drawn in exhaustion. The cold had started to make her numb. She couldn't feel her fingers anymore, and her teeth chattered uncontrollably. She glanced at the horizon, hoping for some sign of life, some clue that she wasn't truly alone. But the world around her was silent, still and unyielding. Her heart sank, and she sank to her knees in the snow. Tears blurred her vision as she thought of her family, her home. Her people, a proud and strong race, had taught her how to fight, how to survive, but they had not taught her how to endure this kind of cold. She had heard stories of humans, creatures who lived on different worlds, but she knew little of them. She had been warned that their kind could be ruthless and dangerous. But now, as her strength faded and the snow began to pile up around her, she no longer cared about the stories. She only wanted warmth, safety, and a way off this frozen planet. Her mind wandered, imagining the warmth of her homeland, the sun shining brightly, the sounds of her people laughing and working together. Those thoughts, however, felt distant now, like a dream fading in the morning light. Lyra's eyes fluttered, and she fought to stay awake. Her body was desperate for sleep, but she knew that if she allowed herself to drift into unconsciousness, there was a chance she might not wake up. She had learned that survival was not about hope. It was about action, but even her actions seemed futile now. She had no more energy to keep moving, no more resources to rely on. The cold was winning. As the night wore on, the winds grew stronger, and the temperature dropped even further. Her breath was a cloud in front of her face, and her body was shaking uncontrollably. She could feel herself slipping away. Then, in the distance, she thought she saw something, a shadow in the snow. She squinted through the blizzard, but it was too far to be sure. Her eyes were growing heavy, and her vision was blurring. It was probably just her mind playing tricks on her. After all, no one would be out here in this storm, would they? But then the shadow moved. It was closer now, no longer a mere trick of her mind. It was a figure, tall, human-like, and walking toward her. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest, a mix of fear and hope rising within her. She didn't know if this figure was a friend or foe, but she had no choice but to wait and see. She forced her body to remain conscious for a moment longer, her eyes focused on the figure through the haze of snow. And then, as the figure came closer, she lost her battle to stay awake. Her eyelids fluttered shut, and she collapsed into the snow, unable to keep herself upright any longer. The snow fell silently, covering Lyra's body like a blanket. Her breath was shallow, the coldness slowly creeping through her skin. She had given in to the exhaustion, her body finally giving way to the frigid air. Her world was a blur of white, fading in and out as if she were caught between sleep and waking. But then, a warmth, an unexpected warmth, wrapped around her. She awoke with a jolt, her eyes opening to a dimly lit room. The walls were rough and simple, but they were warm. A fire crackled in the corner, and the smell of something cooking filled the air. It was unlike anything Lyra had ever experienced before, the sensation of warmth flooding her limbs. Lyra tried to sit up but found that she was too weak. Her body felt sore, every part of her aching from the cold she had endured. She looked down and saw a blanket wrapped around her, covering her frail form. It felt like a lifeline, a sign that she wasn't completely alone. The door to the small cabin creaked open and a tall man stepped inside. His eyes widened slightly when he saw that she was awake. He was human, tall with broad shoulders, wearing simple clothes that looked well worn but sturdy. His face was rough, with a beard starting to grow, and his eyes were kind, yet guarded. "You're awake," he said softly, his voice deep but gentle. "How do you feel?" Lyra tried to speak, but her throat felt dry. She swallowed, her voice raspy. "Where am I?" The man nodded, stepping closer but not too close. "You're in my cabin. I found you outside. You were frozen." Lyra's mind raced as she tried to process his words. She had been out in the cold, desperate for warmth, and now she was here, in this stranger's home. She wanted to thank him, to ask him why he had helped her, but her body was too weak. She could barely keep her eyes open. "You're lucky I found you," the man continued, moving to the fire. "Another hour in that storm and you wouldn't have made it." Lyra tried to focus, but her vision blurred again. She couldn't believe this was real. She had been so close to dying out. There, yet here she was, alive, and in the care of a human. It didn't make sense. Humans were known to be cold, unfeeling creatures, or so her people had always believed. They had always been seen as enemies in the stories of her people's past. But now, as she lay in this stranger's cabin, she couldn't help but wonder if those stories were wrong. The man handed her a wooden cup filled with warm liquid. "Drink," he said, his voice insistent but caring. Lyra hesitated at first. She didn't know this man, didn't know if she could trust him. But the warmth from the cup was too inviting, and her body screamed for nourishment. She took a sip, the liquid rich and soothing, flowing down her throat like fire. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice stronger now. The man gave a small smile, though his eyes remained cautious. "Don't thank me yet. You still need to rest." Lyra nodded, settling back against the blankets. She felt the warmth spreading through her, the fire in her chest matching the fire in the corner. Her body slowly relaxed, and her eyelids grew heavy. She wanted to ask him more questions, to know who he was and why he had helped her, but sleep overcame her once again. Lyra awoke hours later to the sound of a door opening. The man was leaving the cabin, a coat over his shoulders and a rifle slung across his back. He turned before stepping out, his gaze catching hers. "I'm going to check the perimeter," he said. "Stay here. I'll be back soon." Lyra nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She didn't understand why he was doing this for her, a stranger, but she was grateful. Grateful for his kindness, even if she didn't fully understand it. As the door closed behind him, Lyra lay there, staring at the fire. Her thoughts turned back to her people, her homeland, and the crash. She wondered if anyone had survived, if anyone was out there looking for her. But the more she thought about it, the more hopeless it seemed. She had no way of knowing. The world had grown so cold, and now it seemed even colder. She had been wrong. She had assumed humans were cruel, heartless beings. But this man, this human, had shown her nothing but kindness. It made her question everything she had been taught. How could they be enemies when one of them had saved her life? As Lyra lay there, staring into the flames, she made a decision. She couldn't stay here forever. This wasn't her home, and the danger of the bounty hunters that had been chasing her was still out there. She had to move, had to find a way to get off this planet. But for now, she would rest. She would heal. And maybe, just maybe, she would find answers to the questions that plagued her. The door creaked open once again, and the man returned, his face grim. He set down his rifle and removed his coat, his eyes locking with hers. "Somebody's out there," he said, his voice low. "And they're looking for you." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. "Who?" The man's gaze darkened. "I don't know yet, but they're close. We need to move, now." Lyra sat up, her body still weak, but her determination growing stronger. She couldn't afford to waste any more time. She had to leave, had to find safety. And this human, this stranger, was her only chance. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady now. The man nodded, his eyes filled with both concern and something else, something she couldn't quite place. "All right, let's go." The wind howled outside the cabin, rattling the walls and sending fresh waves of snow swirling in the air. Lyra could hear the crunch of snow beneath the man's boots as he moved around, preparing to leave again. She felt a sharp pang of fear in her chest. The mention of someone being out there searching for her sent a chill deeper than the cold ever could. She had no choice. She couldn't stay. "I'm ready," Lyra repeated, trying to push away the weakness that still gripped her. The man, who had yet to give her his name, looked at her, his face serious but determined. He was packing a small bag with supplies, likely preparing for whatever lay ahead. There was no time to ask questions, no time to understand the full picture of what was going on. Her life depended on moving quickly. "All right," he said, his voice steady. He grabbed his rifle, slinging it over his shoulder, and moved toward the door. "Stay close to me. Do you understand?" Lyra nodded, trying to push herself up. Her body still ached, and though the warmth from the fire had given her strength, it was not enough to make her feel completely well. She was exhausted, drained. From the crash and the cold, she had fought to survive, but she knew she had no other option. She couldn't stay here, not with whoever was out there searching for her. The door creaked open, and the man stepped out into the storm, Lyra following, as closely as she could manage. The cold hit her like a slap, but she gritted her teeth and pressed on. The snow was deep and the wind was strong, making every step a struggle. She didn't look back as the cabin grew smaller behind them. There was no going back now. As they walked, Lyra tried to focus on the man in front of her. He moved with confidence, his posture alert, his eyes scanning the surroundings as though he could sense danger lurking just beyond their vision. His silence was unsettling, but she knew he was doing what needed to be done. He had no reason to help her, no reason to risk his life for a stranger. Yet here he was, guiding her through the storm. "How do you know they're close?" Lyra finally asked, her voice barely audible over the wind. The man didn't immediately answer, his steps crunching in the snow as they made their way through the wilderness. He kept his eyes fixed on the horizon, as if searching for any movement. After a long pause, he spoke, his voice low but calm. "I heard them," he said simply. "The wind doesn't carry sound well out here, but when you've lived in places like this long enough, you start to understand how to listen." Lyra's brow furrowed as she considered his words. He wasn't saying much, but what he did say hinted at a life full of experience. It was clear that he was no stranger to this world, no stranger to survival. She glanced at him as they walked, her curiosity growing. What kind of person was he? Why did he live out here alone? And why, despite everything, was he helping her? My name is Jack, the man added, as though reading her mind. He glanced at her quickly, offering her a brief look of understanding. I didn't say it earlier, but we don't have time for that right now. Lyra, she replied quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for everything. Jack nodded, though his expression didn't soften. We'll talk more later. Right now, we need to keep moving. They walked in silence for a while, the only sounds being the howling wind and the crunch of snow underfoot. Lyra's thoughts raced. She had to know more. Why was he out here in the first place, and why had he risked his safety to help her? But questions could wait. For now, survival was the only thing that mattered. Eventually, they reached a ridge, and Jack stopped to survey the land ahead. The snow was thick, and the visibility was poor, but in the distance, Lyra could make out the faint outline of a small shelter. It was hidden well, tucked away against the rocks and shielded from the wind. This is where we're going, Jack said, his voice low. It's not much, but it'll keep us hidden for a while. Lyra nodded, too exhausted to speak. She wasn't sure what to think. She had trusted Jack enough to follow him this far, but she still didn't know if she could trust him completely. There were too many unknowns, too many unanswered questions. As they neared the shelter, Jack motioned for Lyra to stay low. They crouched down, moving quietly across the snow until they reached the small structure. Jack reached for a hidden latch, and the door creaked open. Inside, it was warm. The space was small, just big enough for two people to sit comfortably. The walls were lined with furs, and a small fire crackled in the center, casting flickering shadows across the room. Jack motioned for Lyra to sit, and she obeyed without question. Her legs felt like they might give way at any moment, but she managed to find a place by the fire, her body grateful for the heat. Jack closed the door behind them and leaned against the wall. He set his rifle down, his gaze focused on the entrance. He was still on alert, still waiting for something. Lyra couldn't help but ask the question that had been burning in her mind. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible over the crackling of the fire. Jack didn't answer immediately. His eyes narrowed as if he was weighing his words carefully. Finally he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Because you need help," he said simply. "And I'm not the kind of person who can just walk away when someone's in need." His words surprised her, more than she wanted to admit. She had heard stories of humans, stories that painted them as selfish and dangerous. Yet here was this man, risking everything to help a stranger. It didn't make sense, but at the same time, it felt right. "I'm not just a burden," Lyra said, her voice tinged with doubt. "I've been running from those who want me dead. I don't know if you understand, but this could bring you danger." Jack met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "I understand more than you think, but that doesn't change anything." Lyra fell silent, contemplating his words. She didn't know what the future held, but for now, she had to trust him. He was her only chance. The wind howled outside the small shelter, shaking the walls and causing the fire inside to flicker. Lyra sat by the warmth of the flames, staring into the dancing light. Her mind raced, filled with thoughts of the past, the future, and everything she had left behind. She wasn't sure how long she could keep running, how long she could keep hiding from the people who wanted her gone. Jack sat across from her, sharpening his knife, his expression distant. He had been quiet ever since they entered the shelter. Lyra could feel the tension in the air, and though she was grateful for his help, she also felt the weight of their situation pressing down on her. The quiet was broken when Jack finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "They'll come looking for you," he said, not looking up from his work. "I don't know who they are, but I can tell they won't give up easily." Lyra's heart sank. She had known this, of course, but hearing it from Jack made it feel more real, more urgent. She had never been in this kind of situation before. Her people were warriors, survivors, but even they couldn't outrun an enemy determined to capture them. "I can't keep running forever," she said quietly, her voice filled with frustration. "I don't know how much longer I can hide." Jack set the knife down and finally looked at her. His eyes were kind, but there was a hardness to them, a sign of someone who had seen too much. "You're not alone," he said simply. "I'll help you." Lyra blinked in surprise. She had expected him to say something practical, something about finding a way to escape or fighting back. But instead, he had offered her something she hadn't expected: his support. "Why?" she asked, her voice filled with confusion. "Why help me? You don't even know me." Jack sighed, standing up and moving over to the fire. He threw a few, more logs on, the flames growing higher. The warmth washed over Lyra, but the tension between them remained. "I'm not the kind of person who turns his back on someone in need," he said, his voice steady but with a hint of something softer. "I know what it's like to be alone, to fight for survival. You reminded me of that." Lyra stared at him, trying to understand. She had been raised to believe that humans were cold, selfish, and dangerous. But Jack was proving her wrong with every word he spoke, with every action he took. "You're not like the others," she said slowly, her voice quiet with disbelief. You care." Jack chuckled, a dry sound that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I wouldn't say I care about you just yet, but I do care about doing what's right." Lyra was taken aback. "What do you mean by that?" Jack met her gaze, his expression serious. "I'm not doing this for you, not completely. I'm doing it because you're in danger, and I don't leave people in danger if I can help it. There's enough bad in the world without adding to it." Lyra thought about his words, feeling a strange warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't just the fire that made her feel this way. It was something else, something she hadn't felt in a long time: trust. The room fell quiet again, the crackling of the fire the only sound between them. Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, letting the warmth from the fire seep into her bones. She had been so cold for so long, both physically and emotionally, and now, suddenly, there was a chance to feel something different. "Do you think I can trust you?" she asked, opening her eyes and meeting his gaze. Jack was silent for a moment, his eyes searching hers as if weighing her words. Finally he spoke. "I think trust is earned," he said, his voice soft but firm. "But I'll do my best to prove I'm worth trusting." Lyra nodded slowly, considering his words. It wasn't much, but it was enough for now. She had to take a leap of faith, and something in her told her that Jack wasn't the enemy she had once thought humans to be. Later that evening, after a meal of simple food that Jack had prepared, they settled down to sleep. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows on the walls of the shelter. Lyra lay on her side, wrapped in the warmth of the blanket, listening to the wind howl outside. The sound was constant, unrelenting, but in here, in this small space, she was safe. For now. Jack, on the other hand, sat awake by the fire, his rifle close by. Lyra knew that he was still watching, still listening for any sign of danger. She couldn't blame him. She didn't know what was out there, and neither did he. But one thing was certain: they couldn't stay here forever. The silence between them was different now. It wasn't just the quiet of strangers. It was the quiet of two people who had shared something, a bond forged in the fires of survival. Lyra turned her head, her gaze falling on Jack. His face was serious, his eyes focused on the fire, but there was something in his expression now that hadn't been there before. She couldn't put her finger on it, but it felt like a quiet strength, a determination to keep going despite everything. She closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of the fire and the blanket surrounding her. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in days, she felt a glimmer of hope. The next morning, they awoke early, the fire long extinguished, but the shelter still warm. Jack was already moving, preparing to leave, his movements swift and purposeful. "We need to keep moving," he said without looking up. "The longer we stay here, the more chance we give our enemies to find us." Lyra nodded, sitting up and stretching her stiff limbs. She was still weak, but the rest had done her good. She felt stronger, more focused. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. Jack gave a quick nod, grabbing his rifle and slinging it over his shoulder. "Stay close. No matter what happens, stay close." Lyra stood, stepping toward him. "I will." As they left the shelter and stepped back into the cold, the wind biting at their skin, Lyra felt a strange sense of clarity. There was no going back now. She didn't know where this journey would take them, or what dangers they would face. But she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't alone anymore, and for the first time in a long while, that thought gave her strength. The cold wind bit at Lyra's skin as she walked beside Jack, the two of them moving quickly through the deep snow. The landscape around them was stark and desolate, with only the white of the snow and the gray sky above. The silence of the world felt heavy, as if everything was waiting for something to happen. Lyra's thoughts were scattered, but one thing remained clear. She had to keep moving. The danger wasn't just from the cold. It was from whoever was searching for her. The unknown. Threat kept gnawing at her, making it hard to focus on anything else. But for now, she had Jack, and she had to trust that he would help her survive. As they trudged through the snow, Lyra glanced at Jack. His face was set in a determined expression, his eyes scanning the horizon. He was a man who knew how to survive, and that was clear in the way he moved, confident, yet always aware of his surroundings. She didn't know much about him, but she knew that he was her only hope. They had been walking for hours, with only brief stops to rest. The wind had picked up, and the cold seemed to cut through her clothes no matter how tightly she wrapped herself in the blanket Jack had given her. Her body still felt weak, but she was pushing herself forward, determined to keep up with Jack. "We're getting close," Jack said suddenly, his voice low and steady. Lyra looked at him, confused. "Close to what?" "There's a cabin up ahead," Jack explained, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the snowy landscape. "It's safe there. We can rest, regroup." Lyra's heart lifted slightly at the thought of a safe place, but a part of her still felt uneasy. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that the threat was closer than they realized. But Jack seemed confident, and she couldn't afford to doubt him now. They reached the cabin after another half-hour of walking. It was small, tucked away in a grove of trees, barely visible from a distance. The cabin looked old but sturdy, with smoke curling from the chimney. As they approached, Jack slowed his pace, his movements quiet and careful. "Stay close," he whispered, his voice tense. Lyra nodded, sticking close to him as they made their way toward the door. Jack knocked 3 times, a quiet rhythm that seemed to signal something. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a woman standing inside. She was older than Jack, with sharp eyes and a weathered face, but there was kindness in the way she looked at them. "Jack, I thought I heard you," the woman said, her voice warm but serious. "You've brought someone with you." "This is Lyra," Jack said, his tone firm. "She's in trouble." The woman looked Lyra up and down, her gaze thoughtful. "I can see that. Come in, both of you. You must be freezing." Lyra stepped inside, grateful for the warmth that immediately surrounded her. The cabin was small but cozy, with a fire crackling in the hearth and shelves lined with jars of food and supplies. The woman motioned for them to sit by the fire, and Lyra did so eagerly, feeling the heat seep into her cold limbs. "Thank you," Lyra said quietly, her voice hoarse. "I didn't know where else to go." The woman nodded, sitting down across from her. "You're safe here for now. We've got a few hours before nightfall. Jack told me you've been running." Lyra hesitated before nodding. "Yes, I've been running for days. I don't know who's after me, but they won't stop until they find me." The woman's expression softened, though there was still a wariness in her eyes. "I understand. This world can be harsh, but we look out for each other when we can." Jack sat down beside Lyra, his eyes still alert. "We need to rest and plan our next move," he said. "I don't trust the situation. Whoever's looking for Lyra won't give up easily." The woman nodded, her gaze flicking to the window. "You're right. We've seen our fair share of danger out here. It's not just the cold you need to worry about." Lyra felt a chill at the woman's words. It wasn't just the weather that was dangerous here. There were other dangers, things she didn't fully understand yet. She had been so focused on surviving the crash and the cold that she hadn't taken time to learn. "About the planet itself, who are they?" Lyra asked softly. "The ones chasing me? Do you know anything about them?" The woman looked at Jack, who remained quiet for a moment before responding. "They're not from around here," Jack said, his voice low. "I've seen their kind before. Mercenaries. They don't care who they hurt or who they kill, as long as they get paid. They'll keep looking for you, Lyra, and they won't stop until they find you." Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. She had known the danger was real, but hearing it from Jack made it feel even more real. She couldn't stay here forever. She needed to get off this planet. But how? The woman seemed to sense her thoughts. "You can't stay here long," she said gently. "But we can help you prepare. We've got a few supplies left, and I know a way to get you to a transport station further south. It'll be risky, but it's your best shot." Lyra's mind raced. She had to get to that transport station. It was her only chance to leave this world behind. But would she be ready in time? And what about Jack? She had no idea how long he was planning to stay or what his role in all of this would be. "You don't have to do this," Lyra said, turning to Jack. "I can leave on my own. You've already helped me enough." Jack shook his head. "You're not going alone. We stick together. That's how we survive out here." Lyra didn't argue. She could see the sincerity in his eyes. She wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she had someone on her side, someone who cared. The cabin was quiet now, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. Lyra sat close to the warmth, her mind racing. The woman who had introduced herself as Maria had given her a simple meal, and for a moment she allowed herself to relax. The danger from the mercenaries still loomed, but here, in this small hidden cabin, she felt the safety of having a moment of peace. Jack sat near the window, his rifle resting against the wall beside him. His eyes scanned the surrounding woods, ever watchful, his focus never wavering. Lyra noticed that despite the warmth of the cabin, he remained tense, his muscles stiff, as though he were ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. "We can't stay here much longer," Jack said, breaking the silence. His voice was steady but carried an edge of urgency. "I know a way south, but it's going to be a dangerous journey. We'll need to leave before sunset." Maria nodded. "I've marked the route. It's the fastest way to get you to the transport station. But I won't lie, it won't be easy. The mercenaries could be closer than we think." Lyra's stomach twisted at the thought. She had known this was coming, but now that the moment was here, the reality felt even more terrifying. She wasn't sure what would happen once they reached the transport station, but staying here wasn't an option. The mercenaries would find them eventually if they didn't keep moving. "I'm ready," Lyra said, standing up and walking over to the door. She couldn't let fear stop her now. She had come this far, and there was no turning back. Jack stood as well, his eyes still scanning the horizon. He didn't say anything, but his presence beside her was reassuring. For the first time since the crash, she didn't feel entirely alone. Maria gave them both a long look, as if weighing her words carefully. "Stay safe, both of you," she said quietly. "The world is a dangerous place, and I don't think you realize just how much trouble you're in. But sometimes, the only way to survive is to keep moving, no matter what." Lyra nodded, appreciating the woman's wisdom. Maria had helped her, fed her, and given her a safe place for a few precious hours. But now, she had to move on. As Jack opened the door and stepped into the cold, Lyra followed him, the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. The cold wind hit her immediately, biting into her skin, but it didn't stop her. She kept walking, step after step, her boots crunching in the snow. Jack led the way, his movements swift and confident. He had the kind of quiet strength that Lyra admired. She couldn't imagine what it had been like for him, living out here alone, with only the harsh elements and his own thoughts for company. The path they took was hidden well, winding through the trees and across frozen streams. Jack didn't speak much, but Lyra didn't mind. She was grateful for the silence. It allowed her to gather her thoughts, to focus on the journey ahead. They walked for what felt like hours, the snow growing deeper as they moved further south. The landscape was endless, and Lyra couldn't tell if they were making progress or not. Every direction looked the same, white, cold, empty. But she had to trust Jack. He knew where he was going. After a while, Jack stopped, raising a hand to signal for them to halt. Lyra froze beside him, her heart racing. She had learned to trust his instincts by now. When Jack stopped, it was because something was wrong. "What is it?" she whispered, her eyes scanning the trees, the snow, trying to find what had made Jack so tense. "Movement," Jack said quietly. "Behind us." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. She had expected the mercenaries to catch up sooner or later, but the thought of them actually being so close made her stomach churn. She turned her head slightly, but all she saw was the snow-covered landscape. There was no one in sight. Jack crouched down, motioning for her to do the same. He reached for his rifle, his eyes narrowing. "Stay low! Don't make a sound!" Lyra obeyed, dropping to her knees in the snow, her breath shallow. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for a moment she thought she might not be able to keep still. But she had to. She had to trust Jack. If they were going to survive, they needed to stay hidden. They waited in silence, the only sounds being the wind and the crunch of snow beneath their knees. Every minute felt like an eternity. Finally, Jack whispered, "They're moving past us." Lyra let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She could hear the distant sounds of footsteps, muffled by the snow. Whoever was out there, they weren't looking in their direction. "We move now," Jack said, rising quickly. He started walking again, his pace steady but quick. Lyra followed, trying to keep up, her mind racing. They moved faster now, Jack leading them through the trees with urgency. The air felt colder, sharper, and Lyra could feel the weight of their situation pressing in on her. The mercenaries were close, too close. She had no idea what would happen if they caught up to her, but she wasn't about to find out. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the snow, they reached the edge of a cliff. Below them, a small transport station was visible, nestled between the trees. It was their last stop, their last chance to escape. "We're almost there," Jack said, his voice low but determined. "Stay behind me." Lyra nodded, her legs aching from the long journey. But she could see the transport station now, and the hope of leaving this planet behind filled her with a renewed strength. They were so close. Jack paused, his eyes scanning the area once more. Lyra stayed still, watching him. He was always alert, always aware. It was clear that he was protecting, her watching out for her. He turned to her, meeting her gaze. "We're almost done," he said softly. "But we have to stick together. Don't let go, no matter what happens." Lyra nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had come so far, and it was Jack's help that had brought her here. She wasn't alone anymore. She had someone by her side. Together, they took the final steps toward the transport station, ready to face whatever came next.